Okay, so head, tough part of the body, huh? Body, tough part of life. Hardest things, probably not in the world. It's probably some incredibly detailed architectural thing that's harder to draw, but it's hard. Drawing the figure's hard. So what we're going to try and do is approach this as simply as possible. When we make it, make sure I'm on, yep. When we make things simple, it does not mean they're easy, but they're at least a little easier. And at least they're not complicated. So what I'm going to try and do is look for the biggest, simplest structures. And if I'm doing any kind of rendering and drawing or paint or sculpting, and it's easier in sculpting actually because you're kind of forced into it with the three-dimensional clay or whatever you're using. Drawing, we can see this beautiful highlight in the eye and then draw the eyeball and then the cheek and then the forehead and the hair and then the body. And oftentimes we get caught up in the small things and it destroys the structure of the big things. So we want to start with the biggest, simplest shapes we can. And then the success of the, let me make it a little smaller here. We'll do it probably a couple times. The success of the piece is based on getting the big, simple structures as the landscape to add the smaller terrain of the features. So I'm going to look for the big mask of the face, the big shape of the skull, or the hairstyle, or both. And getting this big structure right is where I'm going to spend most of my time. The anecdote I always mention, because it's so telling to me, is we have some accounts of when John Singer Sargent taught a little bit. He would teach a little bit. So there's people who, there's no recording back then, of course, but there was people who, journaled about it afterwards, wrote about it. And there was one anecdote where he'd mentioned, or it was reported, I forget which, that he spent 86 sittings, and I might be off a couple sittings, but I think it was 86. It was 80-something sittings with this elderly woman doing her portrait. He finally gave up and refused the commission. He could not get it right. And I would bet you if it was possible to prove the bet, and if I was a betting man, that what the problem was, he couldn't get the greater structure right. And so when he got into the features, it all fell apart because they didn't have a foundation to build on. So I want to get the big shapes of the face, the skull, the neck, the hair. I'm going to sneeze. I'm not going to sneeze. Oh, it's so disappointing when you don't get to sneeze. So I want to do that. And the big architecture for the face is going to be the forehead. And the underside of the forehead, which is where the eye sockets sit, and the side of the forehead, where the temple sits, underneath those side sweeping bangs there. And then the cheekbones, which frame and grasp, pinch, like a wrench around a nut, the forehead. And the side of the cheeks. And then how the cheek, or cheeks, from forehead to eye socket to cheek, cheek to mouth, mouth to chin. We fall out of that eye socket over the cheek like water over a waterfall, trickling down the contours of the rock, pushing out and falling down, and pushing out and falling down and pushing out of the eye socket into the cheek, down the cheek, pushing out for the barrel of the mouth. Pushing out again for the chin. So there's a series of subtle stair steps that we want to feel. And then there's going to be a front and a side plane to each of these major and minor forms. And there might even be and oftentimes are, a front and a corner plane, and then a side plane. So if I can understand that greater architecture and allow for the subtle distinctions of a particular likeness, the amount of bone structure, the amount of fleshy skin, the amount of muscle and bone that comes to the surface, we're going to see this architecture, this rise and fall of the whole structure of the face and the hairstyle and the skull. But we focus on the face because that's where most of the features, except for the ear, most of the features sit. So if I can get that architecture, that's going to be the most powerful way to build a head. And so for the architecture of the forehead, becoming the eye sockets, and then eventually being split by the nose, the eyebrows work really great. They give us a sense, a rough sense, but plenty clear enough of that transition from forehead into eye socket. And then the eyes themselves are balls and holes. So if I just draw the balls, I don't have to worry about the holes for the most part. Like so. And if I get more and more detailed, then I can take the front and side plane, put a corner plane or two between it, and work that out. So I'm not going to, I'm kind of looking at it this way, so it's a little hard for me to do proportions and likeness. That'll be my excuse. We're not getting this very good likeness here. But we would just refine the proportions, positions, and the shapes to get the architecture of it, to get the likeness of it. And then what I want to do is feel the architecture of each of these features and the landscape that surrounds the features. And then I want to know how to get out of that piece of architecture, that piece of real estate, and flowing into the next. So I think of those as outs. How do I show you the eyeball? Through the cornea, the iris, the pupil, and the lids. And then how do I get out of that to move you into the forehead or the nose or the cheekbones? How do I show the cheekbones? Move into the temple and the eye socket and the brow ridge and the mouth and so on. So that's what I'm looking for, is the architecture and then how the architectural elements connect, how we move out of one and into the next. And oftentimes we'll do that through gradation. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. So that's kind of what we're after here. And I'm just going to lay this in super quick because we don't have a lot of time, and do a bit of a caricature of our friend Roberto here. See there. And when we're doing the face or the torso, we have an ally called symmetry. What happens here, in some way, give or take the positioning, we're in a 3/4 position, not a full front position, but it happens here. There's the widest top part of the cheekbones that frame and capture the eye sockets and the eyeballs. And when it's over here, if I come all the way over here and feel where it sits there, because of the shadow shape, or in this case, because of the relative highlight here, I want to feel this in relationship to that. Just like as I draw this, make sure I'm on the camera, this side of an egg and this side, this is in response to this. And when I do the constructed shape, there's a rhythm there. And when I lay in any of the constructed tones, the core shadow, the reflected light, the half tone, they're also in response to this. Notice that rhythm there. And whether it's a hard edge or a soft edge, or even a lost edge, we want to feel that rhythm. Notice how I'm actually physically going from this side to this side. And I might lift and jump, but I think of that as an orchestra conductor. You're getting the woodwinds and the percussion sections to work together, and the brass and the strings. And I'm no musician, but that's kind of right, I think. So that's what I want to feel there. So as I draw this side, I'm going to come over here and feel the cheekbone there. And it can be in any manner I want. It could be with a mark it a little highlight, finding a bone structure, anatomy, whatever it is, but feeling from side to side. And then we're going to have a front plane, a corner plane, and a side plane to some degree or another. Now this is a little confused because of the cast shadow of those bangs across the forehead. So I'm just going to pick. And what I want is to describe not all the subtleties, probably, necessarily, but the big simple structure. I want to get the front plane or the front and the corner plane, whatever. Maybe I'll do the cast shadow over from the hair. Maybe I'll put in the local value of the dark hair, just to frame it in there. But what I'm trying to do is feel symmetry there. There's the front plane. Here's a corner plane. I'm going to take it down this way. Can't see it really behind the hair very much, but there's the side plane here. And if I can feel that corner plane on this side, it would be really nice if I could feel it on this side. And I could do this just in line. I'm doing it in tone just for fun, and it shows up a little better on camera. But notice the reflected light here. Just going to drop this out here. But now, this is what I'd spend much of my 86 sittings on. Getting this front plane, maybe it's here, and getting that in relationship to that. Well, shoot, that's off. It should be here against that. That's closer, but it should be here. And then this is a little corner. Here's another corner. And I'd find the symmetry throughout. What Sargent would tend to do is drop the whole socket in and not put the eyeball in. And then use those eyebrows and use the symmetry. And work on this structure before we put the eyeballs in. And then as we feel that architecture, and oftentimes he would caricature a little bit, make it sharper, bone structure more dramatic with the eye socket, bit of a caricature. Best portrait artists usually do that. As far as I'm concerned, always do that. And I'll even think of things like this with the bangs, relative symmetry, sweeping to the right, sweeping to the left. So we're speeding along here, but I'm going to try and track that symmetry throughout. Now the nose, he's got a flatter nose, a little bit more of a boxer's nose, which is really cool. I love that. I'm going to put that little frown line there because it's a nice mark for the center here. So his nose doesn't stick out as much as a European mutt would, like me. But it still goes off in its own direction a little bit. But notice the front plane of the forehead. We're also getting the front plane Make sure we're doing okay. Hey, David. We're also getting the front plane of the nose. So front plane of the forehead's in shadow, front plane of the nose is in shadow, front plane of the eyeballs are in shadow. So I'm going to work those things out, and I'll keep working on the symmetry of those. I'm going to use a reflected light. One of the reasons I picked this reference. There's the far corner of the nose, just like and it's catching reflected light, just like we have the far corner of the forehead, brow, and cheek catching connecting light. So I'd work on those things side to side. This far corner of the cheek, this near corner of the cheek, this far corner of the socket, this near corner of the socket. So I'm going to feel that to that. This cheek to this cheek, this socket to this socket. And I'll work on the symmetry back and forth, back and forth. This needs to get a little higher. And the more I do that, the better. The more let me say that a little clearer. The more I concentrate on that fullness of the front plane of the cheek, fullness of the outside edges of the two sockets, symmetry, this to this, this to this. And then as that cheek emerges from the socket, you can see the out. And then we have the partial front plane of the cheek as we move down here. And then I'd want to feel it on this side as well. This kind of goes out this way. So I want to feel its twin. Pulling out this way. And this is pulling in towards the mouth. This is pulling in towards the mouth. This is pushing out. Barrel of the mouth is pushing out towards the cheeks. This is pushing out towards the cheeks. You can imagine if he grins, opens up. And finding the symmetries throughout. And then there'll be a consistency there. Every time a form, unless it's blocked from light, turns towards the left, is getting that side light and getting significantly lighter. Every time it turns towards the right, it's also getting significantly lighter. Where it makes an abrupt change from front to right, it gets brighter yet. As it slowly fades back into that front plane and bottom plane, it slowly changes value. So, structures, symmetry, quick transition, slow transition. This in relationship to this. Give a little bit of a lash there so we can see that symmetry. Crease of the lid, crease of the lid. Trying to find those back and forth, before you commit, and I'm speeding along here, before you commit to the crease of the upper lid and the actual arc of the lids, you want to find those bigger structures first. I'm kind of rushing past those things to get a little more finish done so you can kind of see the concept. But take your time. Sargent did, and even then, sometimes it didn't work out. Simple does not mean easy, just a little easier. So I might even get the highlight in there and find the other side. It's not there in this case, but find the other side. And we're always looking for that transition. How do we go from front of the cheek into the mouth, from front of the cheek to side of the cheek, from side of the cheek into the jaw? We're going to see a change in value as we get those change of forms, or change in the direction, the planes of the forms, and so on. So let's see how we're doing. Yeah, I think we'll stop there. And I'll spend a lot of time. I get a little hatching over here, the flare of the hairs of the brow. I'm going to do it over here. And just keep playing with those, and then playing with the shape design. How does that fall off that cheek? And then how full is the barrel of the mouth before we get to the chin? And I'll spend quite a bit of time playing with those, and sometimes it helps if I give that background, that outside, a different value. It allows me to see those structures a little better. Start just finding the position of front planes, bottom planes, sometimes before I even try and define the contours, the limits of those things. Finding landmarks. Finding the other side, this side to this side, and so on. I'll do it with shadow shapes. I'll do it with highlights too. So anyway, that's kind of the process. Biggest possible structures, learning those structures so you can apply them to the specifics. Seeing the the architecture of the bone. This is actually an Asian skull, so it's structurally a little different than the Latino skull. They vary a little bit. And then seeing the anatomy, but even more important than that, way more important than that, is seeing the architecture. And these early anatomy books did both. And Bridgman kind of led the way on this. I got a Bridgman over there, but I won't grab it. Let's see here. So seeing the anatomy, but also seeing the architecture, seeing it as shapes and structures and interlocking connections. See if I can find the... There we go. You can see the stair-stepping. We described it a little differently, quite a bit differently, but this is a stylization of that same thing. The skull cap meeting the architecture of the forehead, the transition between and such. So anyway, play with that, learn that, and do these kind of things. And again, I rushed through this, but doing the big stuff and spend a lot of time with the big stuff and just sometimes, maybe even oftentimes at first, not ever getting into the features, just the big architecture. And feel that you can trace over the reference. You can trace over favorite artists' favorite pieces of portraiture and such, and see that architecture.